So let's look at some histology of the anterior and posterior pituitary gland. So we have a total magnification of 40 up here in the upper left-hand corner, and I've marked the anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis as A, and then the neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary as B. Neurohypophysis because it's made from nervous tissue. So if you look carefully, you can see some axons through here. Now if we switch over to the total magnification of 100, you can even more clearly see that there is more extracellular matrix here. You can see these lines that are axons of neurons. And then if we go even closer with the total magnification of 400, you can definitely see those axons. You can see some nuclei of the neurons that make up the neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary. And remember, the posterior pituitary secretes ADH and oxytocin. It doesn't manufacture them or synthesize them. Those are made in the hypothalamus. So if we go back and look at A, that's marked in each of the slides, that's the adenohypophysis or anterior pituitary gland, which secretes 6 or 7 hormones. It depends on the course that you're taking. So TSH, ACTH, GH, prolactin, LH, FSH, and MSH. So again, if we look from the 40x to the 100 to the 400, you can see that the big difference between these two sides of the pituitary gland is that the adenohypophysis is true glandular material. So you can see it's highly cellular versus the more loosely woven or constructed nervous tissue of the posterior pituitary gland. Now in some slides, depending on how they've been stained, you might be able to distinguish between some of the cells in the anterior pituitary gland. The acidophils are more pinkish, the basophils more of a purplish color, and that has to do with the way that those cells take up the dye when the slide is made. And then chromophobes, which are usually somewhat colorless or very light purple color. And one last point to note is the connection between the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. So oftentimes you'll hear that the pituitary gland is the master gland of the endocrine system because it secretes tropic hormones or stimulating hormones that tell other glands to release hormones. So some examples would be TSH and ACTH and FSH. But the connection to the hypothalamus is that it tells the pituitary gland when to release these hormones in many cases. So the hypothalamus makes releasing and inhibiting hormones that then tell the anterior pituitary to release or inhibit a hormone. So I'll give you a specific example. So here's a specific example for you. CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, comes from the hypothalamus and acts on the anterior pituitary and tells it to release ACTH, adrenocorticotropin hormone. That hormone then acts on the adrenal medulla's cortex so that it will release some of the mineral and corticosteroid hormones. When it comes to the neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary, the hypothalamus influences it to release ADH and oxytocin by using action potentials, which is more logical to remember if you remember that the posterior pituitary is nervous tissue.